Satan's strategy to destroy your life isn't obvious, but it's simple, and it's already working. I need you to stop for a second, not because I'm about to teach you something from a book, but because I lived this. I was on the inside of it for years, and I didn't even know it. And the most terrifying part? I thought I was fine. I thought the problem was circumstances, other people, bad luck, just life being hard. It wasn't until everything started falling apart, relationships, peace, purpose, the connection I used to have with God, that I finally looked back and understood what had been happening to me the whole time. And when I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. So I'm not here to preach at you. I'm not here to make you feel condemned. I'm here because somebody needs to say this out loud, and nobody in your life is saying it. What I'm about to walk you through is a process. A real, deliberate, calculated process. And once you recognize it, you're going to see it everywhere, in your own life, in decisions you've already made, in patterns you've been stuck in for years. Because here's what I know, not from a theology class, but from living it. Satan doesn't attack you, he influences you. And that's exactly why you don't feel it coming. You know that feeling when you look at your life and wonder how you got here? Like somewhere between who you used to be and who you are right now, something changed. You didn't plan to end up in this place. You didn't wake up one morning and decide to walk away from what mattered. You didn't choose to become someone who repeats the same mistakes over and over, who keeps circling back to the same sin, the same bad decision, the same moment of weakness, again. But here you are. And the cycle keeps going. You try to stop, you really do. You make promises, you cry about it. You might even pray about it. And then, a few weeks later, a few months later, you're right back in it. That's not random. That's not just human weakness. That's a strategy working exactly the way it was designed. The enemy doesn't need a big moment to take you down. He doesn't need some dramatic spiritual attack, some visible destruction. He just needs time and access to your mind, because your mind is where this whole thing starts. Not your behavior, not your circumstances. Your mind, every single thing you've ever done, good or bad, started as a thought first. That's where the battlefield is. That's where he works. And if nobody ever told you that, then you've been fighting on the wrong ground your entire life. Before we dive into the first step of this strategy, I want to know who I'm speaking with. Drop a comment below letting me know which part of the world you're watching from. I read your stories, and it helps me understand the reach of this message. Also, please take a second to check if you're subscribed. Content like this takes a lot to produce, and knowing that you are standing here with me is what gives me the strength to keep exposing these truths. Step 1. He moves your focus. It always starts here. Always. He doesn't come in with a big temptation on day one. That would be too obvious. You'd recognize it and shut it down. No, he starts smaller than that. He just shifts your focus, that's it. One small, subtle shift in what you're looking at. You wake up one morning, and instead of seeing what you have, your health, your family, your roof, your breath, the grace that kept you through everything, you start noticing what you don't have, what somebody else has, what you wish your life looked like, what feels like it's missing. And it's not like a big voice telling you to be ungrateful. It's quieter than that. It's just a thought, a comparison, a moment of looking at someone else's life and feeling something shift inside you. I remember this happening to me so clearly. There was a season where I had no major problems. Nothing terrible was going on, but I started spending time thinking about everything that wasn't right, everything I didn't have, everything that could be better. And I didn't even notice that the gratitude I used to have just disappeared. It didn't leave with a bang, it faded, because when you stop looking at what God has already given you, it's really hard to stay close to Him. And that distance, that tiny, growing distance, is exactly what the enemy is building toward. He's not trying to get you to sin yet. He's just trying to get your eyes off God. That's step 1. It looks harmless. It's not. Step 2. He plants the desire. Once your focus has moved, the next step is almost automatic. Because here's how the human mind works. Wherever your attention goes long enough, desire follows. You look at something long enough, you start wanting it. And what started as a passing thought becomes a pull, a craving, something that feels urgent, even though a month ago it didn't even exist in your mind. This is where envy is born. This is where covetousness starts. This is where desires that are completely out of alignment with God's design begin to feel completely natural, because you've been feeding them without realizing it. He doesn't force the desire on you. He just puts the thing in front of your eyes and lets your flesh do the rest. Because your flesh wants things, that's its nature. It doesn't need much encouragement. And what starts as, "I just noticed that," becomes, "I kind of want that," and then quietly becomes, "I need that." You didn't decide to want it. You just looked at it too long. That's the trap. And most people walk right into it because it doesn't feel like a trap. It feels like normal human emotion. But the origin matters. Not every desire you feel is from God. Some of them were planted. And by the time you realize you're carrying something you shouldn't be carrying, you're already far down the road. Step 3. He waits for the moment. This is the one that chills me the most when I look back on my own life. He's patient. That's something I didn't understand for a long time. I thought spiritual attacks were sudden, loud, dramatic. But the enemy has no deadline pressure. He's not in a hurry. He can wait. And what he waits for is the moment when you're most vulnerable, not when you're strong, not when you're prayed up, rested, connected to God, surrounded by people who keep you accountable. He waits for the night you're exhausted, the moment you just got some devastating news, the season when you're lonely, the afternoon when you've been fighting with someone you love and you're emotionally raw, the Sunday you didn't go to church, didn't read, didn't pray, and you just feel disconnected from everything that usually holds you. That's when he moves, not before, because he knows that a strong man can resist what a weak man cannot. And he's been quietly feeding a desire in you for weeks, maybe months, and now in your worst moment, that desire is loudest. Your guard is down, your defenses are low, and the thing that seemed manageable when you were strong suddenly feels unstoppable when you're struggling. I can point to almost every major mistake I've made in my life and trace it back to a moment of vulnerability. Every single one. I wasn't weak because I was bad. I was weak because I was human. And the enemy knew exactly when to show up. Step 4. He distorts the truth. Okay, this is the step where it gets dark, because this is where the lie comes in. Not a loud lie, not an obvious one, just a small twist, a reframe, a whisper that says, "It's not really that serious." He doesn't tell you to sin, not directly. He just adjusts your perspective on what sin actually costs. He makes the thing look smaller than it is. He blurs the line between what's right and what feels right. He takes something you know deep down in that quiet place where your conscience still speaks, you know is wrong, and he just softens it. You've been through so much. You deserve this. This one time doesn't define you. It's not like you're hurting anyone. God understands. It's not even that bad. And here's why this works. Because there's just enough truth in some of those statements to make the whole thing slide down easier. You have been through hard things. God is gracious. You're not perfect and he knows that. But those truths become weapons against you when they're used to justify crossing a line that should never be crossed. That's the distortion, truth mixed with deception. And in that vulnerable moment, in the middle of that craving you've been feeding for weeks, your mind grabs onto the part that lets you do what you already want to do. That's not an accident. That's precision. I know what I just said might be a shock to some of you. If you felt like that inner voice or those justifications have spoken to you before, know that you're not alone. So I know who is truly ready to fight back against this process. I want you to type a simple phrase in the comments, "My eyes are open." When you type that, you're not just helping the channel. You're declaring to yourself that the spiritual blindness ends today. Step 5. You start justifying it yourself. This is the step where your own mind becomes the enemy's voice. Because by this point, he doesn't even need to keep working. You take over. You start building the case yourself. I've been faithful for so long, I've earned a break. I'm going to stop after this. I'll deal with it later. Nobody's perfect anyway. At least I'm not doing what that person is doing. You start comparing down. You look for examples of worse behavior to make yours feel acceptable. You start negotiating, trading, promising future obedience in exchange for present compromise. And every one of those justifications feels totally logical in the moment. This is what the Bible is describing when it talks about the heart being deceitful. Your own mind will construct a completely reasonable argument for why the wrong thing is okay. And the scariest part? You'll believe it, not forever, but long enough. Long enough to take the step you were trying not to take, and then you take it. And for a moment, sometimes a very brief moment, there's relief. But then comes what always comes after. You know what I'm talking about. Step 6. It becomes normal. This is where the real damage sets in, because the first time, there's guilt, there's conviction, there's that voice inside you that says, this isn't who you are. And that voice matters. That's the Holy Spirit, that's your conscience, that's God still reaching for you. But here's what happens if you don't respond to it, if you push it down, if you distract yourself, justify it again, or just let time pass without dealing with it. That voice gets quieter. Not because God left, but because you trained yourself to ignore it. The second time is a little easier than the first. The third time is easier than the second. And somewhere around the 10th, 20th, 50th time, you stop fighting it. It's not even a decision anymore. It's just what you do. The thing that used to make you feel convicted now barely registers. And that's not strength. That's not growth. That is your conscience being seared. That is the enemy winning. Because once something that was once clearly wrong starts to feel completely normal, you've lost something very hard to get back. You've lost sensitivity. And a person who can no longer feel the weight of sin is a person who cannot recognize danger when it's right in front of them. I've been there. I didn't call it by its name while I was in it. I called it growing up. I called it being real. I called it not being so religious about everything. I was describing my own spiritual death and calling it maturity. Step 7. The silent collapse. Nobody's life falls apart all at once. That's not how it happens. It's slow. It's quiet. It's the slow withdrawal from the things of God that nobody notices, including you, until you look up one day and realize you can't remember the last time you really prayed, really heard from God, really felt that peace that used to be so present in your life. It's the slow deterioration of your character in small private moments that eventually starts showing up in your relationships, your decisions, your reputation, your peace of mind. It's the slow accumulation of choices that each seemed small on their own, but stacked on top of each other, they built a wall between you and the person God made you to be. And here's what makes this the most dangerous step of all. It doesn't feel like destruction. It feels like normal life. You still go to work, you still function, you might still go to church, you might still call yourself a Christian, but inside, in that place where your spiritual life actually lives, something is hollow, something is cold, something is gone, and the consequences don't all show up on the same day. They unfold over months, years. A relationship that used to be strong quietly breaks down. A level of peace you used to carry disappears, and you forget you ever had it. Opportunities that would have been yours don't come, because you're not the person who was ready to receive them anymore. The version of your life that God was building quietly dismantled, not by some dramatic catastrophe, by a process that started with a small shift in focus and ended here. That's the strategy. 7 steps. And you never saw it coming because not one of those steps felt like destruction. They all felt like life. I want to pause here and just ask you something. Be honest with yourself right now. Is there something in your life, a pattern, a habit, a thought process, a behavior, that you've been repeating for years, that you've tried to stop and couldn't, that you've prayed about but keep going back to? Is there something that used to convict you deeply that now barely gets a reaction from you? Is there an area of your life where you feel spiritually dead, where prayer feels like talking to a ceiling, where the things of God feel distant, irrelevant, or just flat? Is there something you're doing right now that you know? Not because someone told you, but in that deep, honest place inside you, you know is not right. If you're nodding to any of that, I need you to understand something. That's not just bad luck. That's not just human nature being human nature. That is evidence that a process has been working in your life, not to scare you, not to condemn you, but you need to see it for what it is. Because the enemy's greatest advantage is invisibility. As long as you don't recognize what's happening, he can keep working undisturbed. But the moment you name it, the moment you say, I see this for what it is, the whole thing loses power. Most people, when they finally recognize something is off in their spiritual life, do one of two things. They either try to fix their behavior directly, white-knuckle willpower, rules, restrictions, accountability partners, without ever addressing the mind. Or they get so overwhelmed by guilt that they give up entirely, deciding they're too far gone, that God is tired of them, that it's pointless to try again. Both of those miss the real battle completely, because the war is not primarily in your behavior. The war is in your mind. Every action started as a thought, every habit started as a thought, every cycle you're stuck in started as a thought that you entertained, fed, and allowed to grow roots. Which means if you want to break the cycle, you have to go back to the beginning of the process. You have to become vigilant about your thoughts, not in some abstract, mystical way. I mean practically, daily, concretely. What are you choosing to look at? What are you letting your mind dwell on? What thoughts do you entertain versus which ones do you cut off? Because a thought you dismiss immediately has no power. A thought you sit with, replay, justify, and build on, that thought becomes desire. That desire becomes decision. That decision becomes habit. That habit becomes your life. This is what Paul meant when he said to take every thought captive. That's not poetry, that's warfare strategy. The smallest thoughts are where this whole thing starts, which means the smallest thoughts are where it has to be stopped. I need you to hear this part clearly. The enemy doesn't need you to do something big and dramatic. He just needs you to ignore small things long enough for them to become big things. The small moment of comparison that you don't check. The small lie you tell yourself to justify something minor. The small pattern of pulling away from God that you plan to fix later. The small habit that isn't hurting anyone. These are not small. They're the seeds of everything that comes after. And the reason most people miss them is because we've been trained to only take spiritual threats seriously when they're loud and obvious. But this strategy is specifically designed to be quiet. It's designed to move slowly. It's designed to feel like nothing until it's everything. This doesn't start big. It grows because you repeat it. This doesn't destroy you overnight. It works in the silence, in the small decisions nobody sees, in the private moments you think don't count, in the thoughts you choose not to interrupt. That's where the life you were supposed to have either gets built or quietly dismantled. I'm not going to end this by making you feel hopeless, because here's the truth I had to learn the hard way. God doesn't abandon people in the middle of this process. Not at step 2, not at step 5, not even at step 7. He's still there, still reaching, still speaking, even if you've trained yourself to stop listening. The Holy Spirit doesn't give up on you just because you've been ignoring him for a season. But here's what I know. You have to want to come back, not just feel bad about where you are, not just be afraid of consequences. You have to actually want the real thing, the real life, the real relationship with God, the real version of yourself that you know somewhere inside is still possible. And that starts with honesty. Radical, uncomfortable, no more excuses honesty about what's actually been happening in your mind and in your life. Because you cannot fix something you won't name. You cannot break a cycle you haven't acknowledged. You cannot fight an enemy you keep pretending isn't there. But when you see it, when you really see it, you're already ahead of where I was for years. I spent years in cycles I didn't understand. You're watching this video. That's not nothing. That's something moving in you. Something that isn't done yet. Start with your mind. Not your behavior, your mind. Start paying attention to what you're choosing to think about, what thoughts you're entertaining, what comparisons you're making, what lies you've normalized, not with shame, with clarity. Look at the patterns in your life and stop explaining them away. Ask honestly, where did this start? What was the first small thing I allowed that led to this? And then, this is the part that changes everything. Don't just try harder. Surrender that specific area to God, not in a vague, I give it to you prayer, in a real specific, honest conversation where you name exactly what you've been doing and exactly where you lost your footing, because he already knows anyway. The confession isn't for his information, it's for your freedom. Transparency is what breaks the power of things that live in the dark. And start protecting your mind like the battlefield it actually is. Because every good thing in your future flows through a mind that is aligned with truth, and every destructive thing in your past was made possible by a mind that was slowly deceived. Guard it. Be vigilant, not paranoid. Vigilant. There is a difference between a person who lives in fear of the enemy and a person who simply understands the game and refuses to play it. You don't have to live in fear, but you do have to stop being naive, because the cost of naivety, I can tell you from experience, is too high. I said at the beginning that Satan's strategy for destroying your life isn't obvious, but now you've seen it. 7 steps, all of them quiet, all of them gradual, all of them working through your own mind, your own desires, your own justifications. He never forces, he just influences, and he only gets as far as you allow him to get. That's the part most people aren't ready to hear, because it's easier to feel like a victim of the enemy than to take responsibility for the access we've given him. It's easier to blame circumstances or the devil or other people than to look honestly at the small, repeated choices that opened the door in the first place. But responsibility is not condemnation. Seeing your part in this is not the same as having no hope. It actually means the opposite, because if you played a role in where you are, then you can play a role in where you go next, and where you go next is up to you. Not Satanas, not your past, not your patterns. You, starting with the next thought you choose to entertain or cut off, starting with the next small thing you either ignore or take seriously, starting with the moment, maybe this one right now, where you stop pretending everything is fine and start being honest about what you've been allowing, because at the end of the day, this isn't really about the enemy's strategy. It's about what you've been permitting to happen. Before you go, I need to ask a favor from someone who understands the digital battlefield. YouTube often doesn't want messages like this to travel far. The algorithm prioritizes quick entertainment, not the truth that sets people free. If you made it to the end, you are part of this channel's resistance. The only way we beat the system and get this video to those who are being destroyed right now is through your action. Share this link in your family groups or with that one friend you know is going through a difficult cycle. Let's show the algorithm that the truth still has a voice. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next one. If this hit something real in you, share it with somebody who needs to hear it. You might not know who, but you know somebody. And if you've been living in one of these cycles and you're ready to be done with it, the conversation starts with God. Tonight. Not when things get worse. Tonight.